There are places where technology simply stops working, and the reasons are never discussed in public meetings. Highway 26 cuts through the Mount Hood National Forest like a scar across ancient timber, carrying thousands of travelers each year between Portland and the mountain resort. The road follows geological contours that have remained unchanged for millennia, winding past Douglas fir stands and crossing streams that existed long before human settlement. Most drivers notice nothing unusual about mile marker 212. The asphalt appears identical to any other mountain highway section. The yellow centerline paint shows normal wear patterns. The guardrails meet standard specifications. Yet something fundamental changes in that exact location. Something that has persisted for nearly 4 decades. Government Camp sits at elevation 3,020 feet. Established in 1859 as a military outpost during territorial conflicts with local tribes, the settlement grew around timber operations and later became a ski resort community, its population swelling from 200 year-round residents to several thousand during winter months. The town maintains detailed weather records, avalanche reports, and road condition updates. These documents show no unusual atmospheric conditions, no electromagnetic disturbances, and no equipment malfunctions in the immediate vicinity. The anomaly occurs precisely between mile markers 211 and 213, nowhere else. The pattern first appeared in documented form during October of 1987. Sandra Morrison, a Portland radio traffic reporter, was driving to Mount Hood for a weekend assignment when her radio equipment failed. The silence lasted exactly 1 minute and 3 seconds, according to her digital chronometer. When transmission resumed, the radio picked up the same stations at identical signal strength. Morrison filed a technical report with her station manager, noting the precise location and duration. Similar reports began accumulating over the following months. Commercial truck drivers reported CB radio failures. Cell phone users noticed dropped calls that resumed automatically. GPS units showed location uncertainty before reverting to normal operation. Sarah Kim, a telecommunications engineer with Pacific Bell, encountered the phenomenon while conducting signal strength surveys in 1991. "I was measuring cellular tower coverage along the highway corridor," she later wrote in an internal company memo. "At mile marker 212, my equipment registered complete signal loss for approximately 1 minute. I repeated the test 7 times over 3 days. The duration varied by no more than 2 seconds. Kim's supervisor classified her findings as equipment malfunction and reassigned her to urban coverage mapping. The memo remained buried in corporate archives until telecommunications deregulation made the records public in 1996. Local residents developed their own explanations. Jerry Paulson, who operated a service station in Government Camp for 31 years, kept a logbook of customer complaints about radio failures. People would come in asking if something was wrong with their car stereo, he recalled during a 1998 interview. Always the same spot. Always about a minute of silence. I started telling folks it was just the mountain playing tricks, but I knew better. Paulson's logbook documented over 400 individual reports between 1988 and 1997. Each entry included the date, time, and estimated duration of the electronic failure. The consistency was unsettling. Dr. Marcus Reed, a geophysicist from Oregon State University, attempted to study the phenomenon in 1994. His research proposal requested funding to install monitoring equipment along the highway corridor and measure electromagnetic field variations. The proposal was rejected without explanation. Reed resubmitted twice, each time receiving form letters citing budget constraints. A colleague later informed him that the National Science Foundation had received guidance to avoid funding research in that specific geographic area. Reed never published his preliminary findings. The Oregon Department of Transportation maintains detailed maintenance records for Highway 26, including radio dead zones, cellular coverage gaps, and GPS accuracy reports. These documents contain no references to mile marker 212. When questioned directly, ODOT spokespersons redirect inquiries to their Public Information Office, which provides standard responses about natural terrain interference. However, internal memos obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests tell a different story. A 1992 document references ongoing atmospheric interference testing in the government camp area. Another memo from 1995 mentions coordination with federal agencies regarding electronic countermeasures research. The Forest Service also maintains radio communication protocols for the Mount Hood National Forest. Rangers carry emergency transceivers calibrated for the mountainous terrain, with backup frequencies designated for areas with poor signal propagation. Mile marker 212 appears on no official list of communication dead zones, yet ranger station logs consistently note radio contact failures at that location. When pressed for explanations, Forest Service officials cite natural atmospheric conditions and recommend using alternative communication methods while traveling through the area. Weather Service records show no correlation between the electronic failures and atmospheric conditions. Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wind patterns remain within normal ranges during reported incidents. Solar activity monitoring reveals no unusual electromagnetic disturbances corresponding to the timing or duration of the failures. Geological surveys detect no mineral deposits or underground formations that might interfere with radio signals. The silence occurs regardless of weather, season, or time of day. Commercial pilots flying the Portland Bend corridor report similar phenomena. Flight data recorders show brief navigation system interruptions at coordinates corresponding to Highway 26 mile marker 212. Air traffic controllers note temporary loss of transponder signals from aircraft passing through that airspace. The Federal Aviation Administration issued internal guidance recommending alternative flight paths during periods of equipment sensitivity testing in the Mount Hood region. These advisories appear in no public aviation notices or safety bulletins. The phenomenon persists with mechanical precision. Modern GPS units register the same 63-second signal loss that Sandra Morrison experienced 36 years ago. Satellite radio services fail identically. Even newer technologies like smartphone navigation apps encounter the same duration and geographic boundaries. The consistency suggests deliberate rather than natural causation, yet no government agency acknowledges responsibility or provides technical explanations. Mile marker 212 stands unremarkable among the Douglas firs. Its metal surface, reflecting sunlight like thousands of other highway markers across Oregon. Travelers pass through the silence without recognizing its significance, their devices failing and recovering automatically. The mountain keeps its secrets, and the agencies that might know those secrets have learned to stay quiet. Some questions are answered only by the absence of answers, and some investigations end where the documentation stops existing. Some messages are meant to be the last, but nobody planned for them to be puzzles. Tillamook Rock Lighthouse stands on a jagged basalt outcrop, 1 mile off the Oregon coast, earning the nickname Terrible Tilly for the brutal conditions that claimed multiple lives during its construction in 1880. The lighthouse rises 91 feet above mean high tide. Its concrete and stone structure, designed to withstand Pacific storms that regularly send waves crashing over the entire structure. For 77 years, the light guided ships through the treacherous waters near the Columbia River mouth, where fog, hidden rocks, and powerful currents created one of the most dangerous passages on the West Coast. The lighthouse operated with a crew of 4 keepers working in rotating shifts, maintaining the massive Fresnel lens and recording weather observations, ship sightings, and equipment status in daily logbooks that were collected during monthly supply runs. The station's isolation was absolute. Supply boats could only land during calm weather, and winter storms sometimes prevented resupply for 6 weeks at a time. Keepers developed their own routines, their own ways of marking time in a place where the horizon offered no variation, and the sound of waves never stopped. The lighthouse logbooks became detailed chronicles of life on the rock, recording everything from seabird migration patterns to the precise timing of fogbank formations. These records, preserved in Coast Guard archives, show a methodical attention to detail that bordered on obsession. Every entry was dated, timed, and signed. Every observation was cross-referenced with previous entries. The keepers took pride in their precision. March 15, 1957, marked the beginning of the lighthouse's final month of operation. The Coast Guard had decided to decommission Tillamook Rock in favor of automated navigation systems and improved radar coverage from shore-based stations. Senior keeper Harold Wickham received official notification that the light would be extinguished on April 15th, ending nearly 8 decades of continuous operation. Wickham had worked the lighthouse for 12 years, longer than any other keeper on record. His logbook entries were known for their thoroughness and accuracy. The March 15th entry appeared normal, weather clear, visibility unlimited, light operational, supply boat due 20th. 3 days later, the entry read, fog bank approaching from northwest, estimated arrival 0300 hours. Then, on March 21st, a single line appeared that would puzzle Coast Guard investigators for decades. The count is wrong. There were never supposed to be 37. No other entries followed. The logbook remained open to that page when relief keeper Thomas Morrison arrived on March 24th to find the lighthouse deserted. Wickham had vanished without explanation, leaving behind his personal belongings, his radio equipment, and no indication of distress or emergency. The lighthouse lens was still operational, the fuel supplies were adequate, and all safety equipment remained in place. Morrison's own logbook entry documented his discovery. Station abandoned. No sign of Keeper Wickham. All equipment functional. Mysterious final entry requires investigation. The Coast Guard immediately launched a search operation, but found no trace of the missing keeper on the rock or in the surrounding waters. Coast Guard investigators questioned Morrison extensively about Wickham's final entry. I read that line probably 50 times trying to make sense of it, Morrison later told his supervisor. Harold was the most precise man I ever worked with. He counted everything twice. If he said the count was wrong, something was definitely wrong. But investigators found nothing to count. The lighthouse contained standard equipment inventories that had been verified during the previous month's inspection. Supply records showed no discrepancies. The number 37 appeared nowhere in station documentation, equipment serial numbers, or maintenance schedules. Morrison completed the lighthouse's final month of operation alone, but his logbook entries grew increasingly brief and unsettled. Difficult to concentrate, he wrote on April 3rd. Keep thinking about Harold's count. The mystery deepened when investigators discovered that Wickham had been conducting an unofficial census of sorts. Personal notes found in his quarters contained hand-drawn charts tracking seabird populations, weather patterns, and ship sightings with obsessive detail. One chart showed daily counts of cormorants roosting on nearby sea stacks, with numbers ranging from 28 to 43 over a 3-month period. Another tracked the frequency of fog banks, recording 37 separate fog events during the winter of 1956 to 57. A third chart documented ship sightings, noting 37 vessels that had passed within visual range during February and March. The chart suggested that Wickham had become fixated on counting things that most keepers would have considered routine observations. Dr. Eleanor Matsui, a psychiatrist who consulted on the case, noted that isolation could produce obsessive behaviors in lighthouse keepers. The mind seeks patterns and meaning in environments that offer little stimulation, she wrote in her 1958 report. Counting becomes a way of imposing order on an essentially chaotic natural environment. But Matsui's explanation didn't account for Wickham's specific reference to what was supposed to be counted. implying that he had some expected number in mind. The phrase suggested knowledge of a predetermined count that had somehow been exceeded or miscalculated. Local fishing boat captains reported unusual observations during March of 1957. Captain Robert Hines noted that the lighthouse beam seemed to flash in irregular patterns during the final weeks of operation, deviating from its standard 4-second rotation cycle. Sometimes it would pause for maybe 10 seconds, then speed up like it was trying to catch up, Hines later told Coast Guard investigators. Other mariners reported similar timing irregularities, but automatic timing equipment at the lighthouse showed no mechanical malfunctions. The lens assembly operated normally when tested by Coast Guard technicians, suggesting that any timing changes had been deliberately made by the keeper. Weather Service records from March 1957 show no unusual atmospheric conditions that might have affected Wickham's mental state or the lighthouse equipment. Temperatures remained within normal ranges, wind patterns followed, seasonal averages, and barometric pressure showed no significant fluctuations. The fog bank mentioned in Wickham's final entries arrived precisely when predicted, suggesting that his weather observations remained accurate until the end. This accuracy made his final cryptic message even more puzzling. If Wickham could still predict weather patterns with precision, what had gone wrong with his counting? The Coast Guard officially closed the investigation in December of 1957, concluding that Keeper Wickham had likely suffered a mental breakdown due to isolation stress and had either jumped or fallen from the lighthouse during a confused state. The final logbook entry was attributed to psychological deterioration and dismissed as meaningless. Wickham's personal effects were transferred to his sister in Portland, and the case file was archived with hundreds of other maritime incidents from that era. The lighthouse was sold to private investors in 1958 and later converted to a columbarium for cremated remains, a final irony that transformed the site into a place where counting the dead became its primary function. But some questions resist official closure. The lighthouse still stands on its isolated rock, automated equipment now flashing its warning light in perfect 4-second intervals. Visitors who tour the facility occasionally ask about the mysterious count mentioned in the final logbook entry. Tour guides usually explain it as the rambling of an isolated man who had lost touch with reality. Yet the precision of Wickham's other observations suggests a mind that remained analytical until the very end. Perhaps he had discovered something that was never meant to be counted, something that transformed a routine lighthouse operation into a vigil over quantities that shouldn't have existed. The count remains wrong, and nobody knows what 37 was supposed to represent. Some patterns in the landscape were never meant to be found by accident. The Ochoko National Forest encompasses 850,000 acres of ponderosa pine and high desert plateau in central Oregon, stretching from the Cascade Range to the Blue Mountains. The terrain varies from dense timber stands to open meadows and exposed granite ridges formed by volcanic activity millions of years ago. The forest was established in 1906, initially managed for timber harvest and watershed protection. Early surveys focused on identifying merchantable timber and mapping access roads, with little attention paid to the remote granite outcroppings that dot the landscape. These formations, composed of intrusive igneous rock, provided few resources of commercial value and were generally left unmapped, except for basic topographic features. The isolation of these areas meant that comprehensive geological surveys were delayed until the 1960s, when mineral exploration and recreational development created demand for detailed mapping. The first marker was discovered in August of 1983 by Forest Service Ranger Michael Torres during a routine fire prevention patrol. Torres was checking lightning strike damage along Lookout Mountain when he noticed an unusual metallic gleam in a granite outcrop. The object appeared to be a brass disc, approximately 4 inches in diameter, embedded flush with the rock surface. The disc bore intricate engravings including compass directions, numerical coordinates, and symbols that Torres did not recognize. The craftsmanship was exceptional, with precise lines and detailed geometric patterns that suggested professional surveying equipment. Torres photographed the marker and filed a report with his supervisor, noting its location at coordinates 44 degrees, 15 minutes north latitude, and 120 degrees, 43 minutes west longitude. Investigation of the marker revealed more questions than answers. The brass showed signs of significant weathering, suggesting it had been in place for decades. More puzzling was its location within the granite formation itself. The rock showed no evidence of drilling or excavation, as if the marker had been embedded during the formation of the granite millions of years ago. Dr. Janet Silverman, a geologist from Oregon State University, examined the site in September of 1983 and found the placement impossible to explain through conventional surveying methods. The marker appears to be integral to the rock formation, she wrote in her preliminary report. There are no tool marks, no signs of recent installation, and no access route that would have allowed surveying equipment to reach this location during any historical period of settlement. The discovery prompted a broader search for similar markers throughout the Ochoco National Forest. Over the following 6 months, Forest Service crews located 16 additional brass discs, each embedded in granite outcroppings at precisely measured intervals. The markers formed a perfect compass rose pattern when plotted on topographic maps, with each disc positioned exactly 2.7 miles from its nearest neighbors. The central marker occupied the geographic center of the pattern, while the others radiated outward in the 16 traditional compass directions, including north, northeast, east, southeast, south, southwest, west, northwest, and the 8 intermediate directions. Rangers who participated in the search described the experience as increasingly unsettling. After we found the third marker, it became clear we were looking at something deliberate, recalled Ranger Patricia Hoffman, who led several search teams during 1984. The precision was unnerving. These weren't random placements or natural formations. Someone had mapped this entire area with mathematical accuracy that we couldn't match with our own equipment. The marker's coordinates, when calculated to the 4th decimal place, showed deviations of less than 3 feet from perfect geometric spacing across a diameter of over 10 miles. The engravings on each marker proved equally mysterious. While all bore compass directions and numerical coordinates, they also included symbols that matched no known surveying conventions. Dr. Robert Chen, a cartographer from the University of Oregon, studied photographs of all 17 markers and found the symbols consistent but unexplained. The numerical coordinates don't correspond to any standard surveying system used in Oregon, Chen noted in his 1984 analysis. The symbols appear to be a form of notation, but they don't match any historical surveying practices, military mapping systems, or geological survey markers we've encountered. Local residents provided conflicting accounts of the marker's history. Frank Morrison, who had lived near the forest boundary since 1938, claimed his grandfather had mentioned brass stars in the rocks during the early 1900s. Morrison's grandfather had worked as a guide for hunting parties and reportedly warned clients to avoid certain granite ridges where the marks were wrong. However, no written records supported these claims, and Morrison admitted his grandfather had never explained what he meant by the marks being wrong. Other longtime residents had no knowledge of the markers and expressed surprise that such distinctive objects had remained hidden for so long. The Forest Service launched an official investigation in 1985, requesting assistance from the United States Geological Survey and the National Park Service. The investigation team included surveyors, geologists, archaeologists, and historians, tasked with determining the marker's origin and purpose. Initial findings were inconclusive. Carbon dating of organic material found in microscopic cracks around the markers suggested they had been in place for at least 50 years, but the technique could not provide more precise dating for metal objects embedded in granite. More sophisticated analysis revealed that the brass composition matched alloys used in surveying equipment from the early 20th century, but dozens of manufacturers had produced similar materials. Archives research yielded no documentation of any surveying project that could have created the compass rose pattern. The General Land Office records, which documented all official surveys in Oregon Territory and statehood, contained no references to surveying activities in the specific locations where the markers were found. Military records showed no mapping exercises or training operations in the area. Private surveying companies had no contracts or work orders for projects matching the markers' scope and precision. The investigation team concluded that if the markers were the result of human activity, that activity had been conducted without official documentation or institutional oversight. Dr. Silverman's geological analysis raised additional concerns about the markers' placement. The granite formations containing the markers were part of the same igneous intrusion, formed during a single volcanic event approximately 15 million years ago. If the markers had been placed by conventional surveying methods, their installation would have required extensive excavation and reconstruction of the rock surfaces. No evidence of such work existed. The granite around each marker showed natural fracture patterns and weathering consistent with undisturbed geological processes. Either these markers were installed using techniques that leave no trace, Silverman wrote in her final report, or they represent a phenomenon that challenges our understanding of the geological timeline. The investigation was quietly concluded in 1987 without official findings or public announcement. The markers were designated as objects of unknown origin, and their locations were removed from public trail maps and recreational guides. Forest Service personnel received instructions to discourage public access to the marker sites and to report any unusual activity in the surrounding areas. Dr. Chen's cartographic analysis was classified, and copies of his detailed measurements were transferred to an unspecified federal agency. Team members were reassigned to other projects, and Dr. Silverman found her research funding redirected toward conventional geological surveys. The markers remain embedded in the granite ridges of the Ochoko National Forest, their brass surfaces slowly oxidizing in the mountain air. Occasional hikers still discover them, usually reporting their findings to park rangers, who politely explain that the objects are historical surveying equipment of uncertain origin. The perfect compass rose pattern continues to radiate across the landscape, its purpose and creators unknown. The precision that once impressed surveyors now suggests something more disturbing, that someone mapped this remote wilderness with an accuracy that preceded the technology needed to achieve it, leaving behind only questions embedded in stone that refuses to reveal its secrets. There are places where nature refuses to vary, and the reasons are filed away where nobody asks questions. Crater Lake occupies the collapsed caldera of Mount Mazama in southern Oregon, formed 7,700 years ago, when the volcano erupted and subsequently collapsed into its own magma chamber. The lake reaches a maximum depth of 1,943 feet, making it the deepest lake in the United States and ninth deepest in the world. The caldera walls rise between 500 and 2,000 feet above the water surface, creating a natural basin with no inlets or outlets. The lake maintains its water level through precipitation and snowmelt, with evaporation and underground seepage providing the only outflow. This closed system creates unique conditions that have fascinated limnologists since scientific study began in the early 1900s. The water's exceptional clarity and deep blue color result from the lake's depth and the absence of sediment inflow, allowing sunlight to penetrate to unusual depths before being absorbed or scattered. Scientific monitoring of Crater Lake began in earnest during 1952, when the United States Geological Survey established a permanent research station in cooperation with the National Park Service. The initial research focused on understanding the lake's thermal structure, water chemistry, and biological systems. Dr. Edmund Morrison, the project's lead limnologist, designed a comprehensive monitoring program that included regular temperature measurements at various depths. The deepest measurements were taken at coordinates corresponding to the lake's maximum depth, using precision thermometers lowered by cable from a research vessel. Morrison's team recorded measurements twice weekly during ice-free months and monthly during winter when weather permitted access. The first anomaly appeared in Morrison's data logs during late 1952. Temperature readings from the lake's deepest point consistently measured 47.3 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of season, weather conditions, or surface temperature variations. Morrison initially suspected equipment malfunction and replaced the thermometers multiple times. New instruments produced identical readings. The consistency was unprecedented in Morrison's experience with deep lakes, which typically showed seasonal variations of several degrees even at maximum depth. Morrison expanded the monitoring program, taking measurements from multiple points near the deepest location and comparing results with temperature readings from intermediate depths. The pattern remained consistent. Surface temperatures varied seasonally. Intermediate depths showed gradual temperature changes with depth, but the deepest point maintained its precise 47.3 degrees. Morrison's assistant, graduate student Catherine Wells, kept detailed records of the measurement procedures and environmental conditions during each sampling trip. Dr. Morrison became obsessed with that temperature reading. Wells later recalled during a 1983 interview, he would check and double-check the equipment before every trip. He brought backup thermometers, different cable systems, even borrowed equipment from other research stations. Nothing changed the result. Wells documented over 300 individual measurements between 1953 and 1955, each showing the same temperature to within 1/10 of a degree. The precision troubled Morrison, who understood that natural systems rarely maintained such exact consistency over extended periods. Other researchers who visited the station expressed skepticism about the temperature anomaly. Dr. 15 of the temperature. Robert Chen, from the University of Washington, examined Morrison's equipment and procedures in 1954 and found no technical flaws. The methodology was sound, and the equipment was properly calibrated, Chen noted in his report. Yet the consistency of the readings defied established principles of thermal layering in deep lakes. Chen conducted his own temperature measurements using different instruments and techniques, obtaining results that matched Morrison's data exactly. The validation only deepened the mystery surrounding the lake's thermal behavior. Local park rangers and boat operators reported their own observations during the early years of the monitoring program. Ranger James Hoffman noted that the research boat's engine often stalled when positioned directly over the deepest measurement point, requiring multiple restart attempts. It happened maybe 60% of the time, Hoffman recalled. The engine would just quit. No warning, no obvious mechanical problem. Move 50 feet in any direction, and it started right up. Other boat operators reported similar experiences, but mechanical inspections revealed no common equipment problems or maintenance issues that could explain the stalling pattern. The temperature measurements continued unchanged through the 1950s and early 1960s. Morrison published several papers documenting the anomaly, proposing various theories including underwater thermal springs, unusual mineral content, or unique circulation patterns. None of his hypotheses could fully explain the mathematical precision of the temperature readings. Peer review committees questioned Morrison's methodology and suggested that systematic measurement errors were the most likely explanation. Morrison responded by inviting independent researchers to verify his results, but few accepted the invitation due to the lake's remote location and the expense of conducting deep-water research. The situation changed abruptly on September 14, 1967. Wells, now serving as the project's senior researcher following Morrison's retirement, conducted routine temperature measurements and recorded 46.8 degrees at the deepest point. She immediately suspected equipment malfunction and repeated the measurement 3 times with different thermometers. All instruments showed readings between 46.7 and 47.1 degrees. The 15-year pattern of exact consistency had ended without warning or apparent cause. Subsequent measurements showed normal thermal variations consistent with other deep lakes. Winter readings dropped to 45 degrees, summer measurements rose to 49 degrees, and the temperature varied gradually with seasonal changes and depth. The precise 47.3-degree reading never reappeared. Wells documented the change in her research logs, but received little institutional support for investigating the sudden shift. The National Park Service was preparing to reduce funding for limnological research at Crater Lake, and administrators showed no interest in pursuing anomalies that no longer existed. Dr. Morrison was consulted about the temperature change during his retirement, but offered no satisfactory explanation. 15 years of identical readings, then suddenly normal variation, he wrote in a personal letter to Wells. Either we were measuring something that wasn't water temperature, or something fundamental changed in the lake's thermal system. Morrison suggested that underwater geological activity might have altered the lake's heat distribution, but seismic monitoring showed no unusual activity during September of 1967. The change appeared to have occurred without any detectable environmental trigger. The research station's funding was eliminated in 1969, ending regular deep-water temperature monitoring at Crater Lake. Subsequent studies focused on water quality, biological surveys, and recreational impact assessment rather than thermal anomalies. Morrison's temperature data was archived at the Pacific Northwest Research Station, where it remained largely forgotten until digital archiving projects in the 1990s brought the records back to scientific attention. Modern researchers who examined the data expressed surprise at both the consistency of the early measurements and the abrupt change to normal variations. Recent attempts to replicate Morrison's measurements using modern equipment have produced results consistent with normal thermal stratification patterns. The deepest point now shows seasonal temperature variations between 44 and 49 degrees, typical of lakes at similar latitude and elevation. No trace remains of the anomalous temperature stability that characterized the site for 15 years. The lake keeps its secrets beneath nearly 2,000 feet of crystalline water, and the questions Morrison couldn't answer have settled into the darkness where the measurements once refused to change. Some sounds come from places that shouldn't make noise, and they follow schedules that nobody programmed. Lebanon sits in the heart of Oregon's Willamette Valley, 43 miles south of Salem along the South Santiam River. The town was established in 1847 by pioneers who named it after Lebanon, Tennessee, though local folklore suggests the name came from the cedar trees that reminded settlers of biblical Lebanon. The area developed around timber mills and agricultural processing, with a population that grew slowly from 800 residents in 1900 to 15,000 by 1970. The valley's fertile soil and mild climate supported diverse farming operations, while the surrounding foothills provided timber resources and gravel quarries. Lebanon's location between the Cascade Range and the Coast Range created a natural acoustic basin where sounds carried unusual distances, a phenomenon noted by early settlers who could hear train whistles from Albany 20 miles away. The frequency was first documented on November 7, 1979, during a routine seismic monitoring survey conducted by Pacific Northwest Seismic Network. Graduate student David Chen was calibrating underground listening equipment when he detected an anomalous low-frequency signal that didn't match typical seismic activity. The signal consisted of 17 distinct tones, each lasting approximately 8 seconds, followed by a period of silence lasting 4 hours and 12 minutes before the sequence repeated. Chen initially suspected equipment malfunction, but the signal appeared consistently across multiple monitoring stations positioned around Lebanon. The frequency measured 28.6 Hz, below the range of normal human hearing but detectable by sensitive recording equipment. Chen's supervisor, Dr. Margaret Foster, reviewed the recordings and confirmed that the signal originated from underground sources beneath Lebanon rather than atmospheric or surface phenomena. The triangulation data indicated the signal source lay approximately 150 feet below ground level, centered beneath the intersection of Main Street and 2nd Avenue in downtown Lebanon. Foster authorized extended monitoring to determine whether the signal represented natural geological activity or artificial sources. Over 6 weeks of continuous recording, the pattern never varied. The 17-note sequence played with mechanical precision every 4 hours and 12 minutes, beginning at times that showed no correlation with solar cycles, tidal patterns, or human activity schedules. Local residents reported varying degrees of awareness regarding the underground frequency. Margaret Walsh, who operated a downtown bakery for 31 years, described experiencing mild headaches that occurred in regular intervals. "I always got these little headaches around the same times each day," Walsh explained during a 1981 interview. "I thought it was the ovens or maybe blood sugar, but they were so predictable. 4 in the morning, 8 in the morning, noon, 4 in the afternoon. Like clockwork." Other residents reported similar symptoms, though most attributed them to work stress or environmental factors rather than acoustic phenomena. Dr. James Morrison, Lebanon's only physician during the early 1980s, noted an unusual pattern of patient complaints about tinnitus and minor hearing disturbances, but saw no clear medical explanation. Robert Patterson, a maintenance supervisor for the Lebanon Water Department, encountered the frequency while investigating persistent vibrations in underground utility lines. "We kept getting calls about humming in the water pipes," Patterson recalled. "The complaints came from the same general area downtown, always around the same times. I went down into the utility tunnels with listening equipment and heard this low rumbling that seemed to come from deeper underground." Patterson's maintenance logs documented 17 instances of pipe vibrations between December 1979 and March 1980, each lasting approximately 2 minutes and occurring at 4-hour intervals. The vibrations caused no structural damage, but created audible humming in residential plumbing systems. Dr. Foster expanded the investigation in 1980, bringing in additional seismic equipment and acoustic analysis technology from the University of Oregon. The expanded monitoring confirmed the signal's underground origin and revealed its remarkable consistency across seasonal and weather variations. The 17-note sequence never changed in duration, frequency, or timing, regardless of atmospheric pressure, soil moisture, or seismic activity in the surrounding region. Foster's team attempted to correlate the signal with known underground features, including utility lines, geological formations, and subsurface water systems, but found no matches. The Lebanon area had no industrial facilities capable of generating such precise low-frequency signals, and geological surveys revealed no underground cavities or formations that could produce acoustic resonance. The investigation attracted attention from federal agencies in 1981, when Foster published preliminary findings in the Journal of Applied Geophysics. Within weeks of publication, Foster received a visit from representatives of the United States Geological Survey, who requested copies of all recording equipment and data related to the Lebanon frequency. The officials explained that the signals might pose national security concerns and suggested that Foster discontinue her research. Foster complied with the request, but retained copies of her early recordings, which she stored in personal archives rather than university files. Dr. Chen, who had discovered the original signal, found his graduate funding redirected to conventional seismic research projects unrelated to acoustic anomalies. "I was told that my thesis committee had concerns about the scientific validity of studying unexplained sounds," Chen later wrote in a 1985 letter to Foster. "They suggested I focus on earthquake prediction models instead of chasing acoustic ghosts." Chen completed his degree using traditional seismic data and never published his findings about the Lebanon frequency. His original recordings disappeared from university archives during a routine data reorganization in 1983. Local law enforcement encountered the frequency during routine investigations of noise complaints in downtown Lebanon. Police Sergeant William Barnes noted that domestic disturbance calls often clustered around specific times that corresponded to the underground signal's schedule. We'd get calls about arguments between neighbors, complaints about loud music, reports of disturbing sounds. Barnes recalled, looking back at the logs, there was definitely a pattern. Same times every day. Same general area of town. Barnes attempted to document the correlation between the frequency and noise complaints, but his superiors discouraged the investigation as irrelevant to police duties. The Lebanon frequency continues to broadcast its 17-note sequence with unchanged precision 44 years after its discovery. Modern acoustic equipment confirms that the signal maintains identical characteristics to the original 1979 recordings. The source depth remains approximately 150 feet below downtown Lebanon, and the timing never varies by more than 2 seconds from the 4-hour 12-minute schedule. Geological surveys using ground-penetrating radar and core sampling have found no artificial structures or natural formations that could generate the signal. The frequency appears to originate from solid bedrock with no cavities or mechanical systems present. Recent attempts to study the Lebanon frequency have encountered consistent institutional resistance. Research proposals are declined without detailed explanation. Funding requests are redirected to conventional projects, and academic publications on the subject face extended peer review delays. The Lebanon City Council has no official position on the frequency and refers inquiries to the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, which maintains no records of anomalous acoustic phenomena in the Willamette Valley. The frequency plays its mechanical song beneath the streets where people work and live, following a schedule that nobody set and serving a purpose that nobody admits to understanding. The notes echo through rock that should be silent, keeping time in a place where time should have no meaning. Sometimes the earth draws pictures that nobody was meant to see from above. The Oregon Dunes National Recreation Area stretches along 40 miles of Pacific coastline between Florence and Coos Bay, encompassing 31,000 acres of sand formations that rise up to 500 feet above sea level. These coastal dunes formed over thousands of years as Pacific storms carried sand inland from exposed continental shelf areas during Ice Age sea level changes. The Siuslaw River and prevailing westerly winds continue to shape the landscape, creating a constantly shifting maze of ridges, valleys, and flat areas known locally as deflation plains. The dunes support unique ecosystems including shore pine forests, freshwater wetlands, and rare plant communities adapted to the harsh conditions of wind-blown sand and salt spray. Scientific monitoring of dune migration patterns began in the 1950s when the United States Forest Service needed to understand sand movement rates for recreation planning and habitat management. Aerial photography surveys of the Oregon dunes started in 1962 as part of a comprehensive land management study conducted by the Forest Service in cooperation with Oregon State University. Dr. Harold Whitman, a geomorphologist specializing in coastal processes, supervised the photographic documentation project designed to track seasonal and annual changes in dune formations. The surveys employed standard mapping aircraft, flying predetermined grid patterns at altitudes between 3,000 and 5,000 feet, using high-resolution cameras to capture overlapping images that could be assembled into detailed topographic maps. Whitman's team conducted flights quarterly during clear weather conditions, building an archive of photographs that documented dune migration rates, vegetation changes, and the effects of recreational vehicle use on sand stability. The first anomalous formation appeared in aerial photographs taken on June 14, 1964. When viewed from above, a section of dunes near Reedsport had arranged itself into a perfect equilateral triangle, with sides measuring approximately 400 yards in length. The formation consisted of 3 parallel sand ridges that met at precise 60-degree angles, creating geometric perfection that seemed impossible given the chaotic nature of wind-driven sand movement. Whitman initially suspected photographic distortion or processing errors, but ground surveys confirmed the triangle's existence and mathematical precision. The formation remained stable for exactly 3 months before gradually dissolving as autumn storms reshaped the landscape into typical irregular dune patterns. Photography from subsequent surveys revealed similar geometric formations appearing at regular intervals throughout the Oregon dunes. A perfect hexagon materialized near Winchester Bay during spring of 1965, its 6 sides measuring 230 yards each and oriented precisely to magnetic north. The following year brought a spiral formation that unwound clockwise over 7.5 rotations, covering nearly 6 acres of previously featureless sand. Each formation appeared suddenly between quarterly survey flights, remained stable for exactly 3 months, then dissolved without leaving traces of its geometric organization. Weather station data from the period showed no unusual wind patterns, storm activity, or atmospheric conditions that could explain the formation's appearance or their consistent 3-month duration. Local residents and recreational users of the dunes reported strange experiences during the periods when geometric formations were present. Janet Morrison, who operated a sand rail rental business in Florence, noticed that her customers frequently became disoriented while driving in areas where formations had appeared. People would come back saying their compasses were spinning or pointing the wrong direction, Morrison recalled. During a 1976 interview, they described feeling dizzy or nauseous in certain spots, like the sand was moving under them, even when it wasn't. Morrison began keeping records of customer complaints and found they clustered around the same geographic areas where Whitman's aerial surveys had documented geometric formations. Dr. Robert Chen, a physicist from the University of Oregon, investigated reports of compass anomalies in the dunes during 1967. Chen's magnetic field measurements revealed localized disturbances that corresponded precisely to the locations of geometric sand formations. The magnetic readings were clearly abnormal, Chen noted in his research log. Standard compass readings deviated by 15 to 20 degrees from true magnetic north, but only within the boundaries of the geometric formations. 50 feet outside those boundaries, magnetic readings returned to normal. Chen attempted to correlate the magnetic anomalies with underground geological features, but core samples revealed only typical coastal sand deposits with no metallic minerals or unusual magnetic properties. Wildlife biologists working in the Oregon dunes documented behavioral changes in local animal populations during periods when geometric formations were present. Dr. Sarah Kim observed that shorebirds avoided flying directly over the formations, instead following circuitous routes that added considerable distance to their normal migration pattern. The birds would approach the area, then suddenly veer away, as if encountering an invisible barrier, Kim wrote in her 1968 field notes. This behavior was consistent across multiple species and occurred only when the geometric formations were visible from aerial surveys. Small mammals, including mice and rabbits, also avoided the formation areas, creating gaps in normal population distribution patterns that persisted until the geometric shapes dissolved. The Forest Service classified Whitman's photographic documentation as restricted access in 1975, citing concerns about public safety and environmental protection. Officials explained that unrestricted distribution of the aerial photographs might encourage dangerous recreational activities or unauthorized scientific research in sensitive dune habitats. Whitman's objections to the classification were overruled by regional administrators who transferred the photographic archive to an undisclosed federal facility. Whitman was reassigned to conventional forest management duties and prohibited from conducting further aerial surveys of the Oregon dunes. His requests to publish scientific papers about the geometric formations were denied due to national security considerations that were never clearly explained. Dr. Chen's magnetic field research was similarly restricted when federal representatives visited the University of Oregon in 1976. Chen's equipment was confiscated for calibration purposes and never returned. His research data was classified as preliminary findings, requiring additional verification before publication. Chen received funding for alternative research projects unrelated to magnetic anomalies, and his graduate students were redirected to conventional physics studies. The magnetic field measurements from the Oregon dunes disappeared from university archives during a routine data reorganization that eliminated records deemed scientifically inconclusive. Contemporary aerial surveys of the Oregon dunes show typical irregular sand formations consistent with natural wind patterns and coastal processes. No geometric shapes have appeared since the final documented formation dissolved in November of 1974. Modern GPS and satellite mapping systems reveal no magnetic anomalies or unusual geological features in areas where the formations once appeared. Recreation management plans make no reference to compass disturbances, wildlife avoidance patterns, or restrictions on aerial photography. The dunes continue their natural migration patterns, shaped by wind and weather, into formations that follow no mathematical principles and serve no apparent design purpose. Yet questions remain embedded in the sand, like archaeological artifacts waiting for discovery. The precision of the formations suggests intentional design rather than random natural processes. The consistent 3-month duration implies a mechanism that operated according to predetermined schedules. The magnetic anomalies indicated forces that conventional geology cannot explain. The geometric shapes appeared for 12 years, then stopped appearing without explanation or institutional acknowledgement. The Oregon dunes keep their secrets buried beneath layers of shifting sand, where patterns once emerged that were too perfect to be accidental and too disturbing to be studied. There are places where the Earth keeps appointments that nobody scheduled. The Painted Hills Unit of John Day Fossil Beds National Monument covers 3,000 acres of badlands in Wheeler County, Oregon, where ancient volcanic ash deposits created layered formations that expose 40 million years of geological history. The hills rise from sagebrush flats in bands of red, yellow, and gold that shift with changing light conditions throughout the day. These colors result from iron oxides, aluminum compounds, and manganese deposits in the claystone layers, each representing different climatic periods when the region experienced tropical, temperate, and arid conditions. The formations were created during the Eocene and Oligocene epochs, when volcanic activity in the Cascade Range deposited ash across central Oregon, preserving plant and animal fossils in remarkable detail. The area became a national monument in 1975, protected for its paleontological significance and striking visual landscape that attracts thousands of visitors annually. Scientific study of the Painted Hills began in earnest during the 1930s when paleontologist Ralph Cheney discovered well-preserved leaf fossils that provided evidence of ancient climate patterns. The fossil record revealed a transformation from subtropical forests to grasslands, as the Pacific Northwest climate gradually cooled and dried over millions of years. Geological surveys mapped the various ash layers and identified the mineral compositions responsible for the hill's distinctive coloration. Iron oxides created the red bands. Aluminum silicates produced yellow and gold layers, and manganese compounds contributed darker purple and black striations. The colors were considered stable and permanent, resulting from chemical processes that had operated over geological timescales. No natural mechanism was known that could alter these mineral-based colors rapidly or temporarily. The first documented color shift occurred on September 23, 1981, during a routine geological survey conducted by Dr. Margaret Foster from the University of Oregon. Foster was photographing stratigraphic layers for a paleoclimate study when she noticed that a prominent red formation had suddenly changed to deep blue. The transformation began at exactly 3:17 p.m. and affected approximately 2 acres of exposed hillside. Foster documented the color change with both black and white and color photography, noting that the blue coloration appeared uniform across all affected rock surfaces, regardless of their original mineral composition. The blue color was intense and saturated, unlike any natural mineral coloration she had observed in decades of geological fieldwork. The color shift lasted precisely 11 minutes before the formations gradually returned to their normal red and yellow hues. Foster observed the transition through binoculars and recorded that the change occurred simultaneously across the entire affected area rather than spreading gradually from a central point. She immediately collected rock samples from the affected formations, but mineral analysis revealed no chemical differences between the samples and control specimens taken from unaffected areas. The rocks showed no residual traces of blue pigmentation or altered mineral composition that could explain the temporary color change. Park Ranger James Morrison witnessed subsequent color shifts during his 23-year tenure at the Painted Hills. It happened every year on the same date at the same time. Morrison explained during a 1997 interview, "I started setting my watch by it, 3:17 in the afternoon on September 23rd, like clockwork." Morrison photographed the phenomenon annually and maintained detailed logs of weather conditions, visitor activity, and equipment status during each occurrence. His photographs consistently showed the same pattern: red and yellow formations changing to deep blue for exactly 11 minutes before returning to normal colors. Morrison's documentation revealed that the affected area gradually expanded over time, growing from 2 acres in 1981 to nearly 8 acres by 1995. Other park personnel reported experiencing unusual sensations during the color shifts. Ranger Patricia Wells described feeling disoriented and nauseous when the formations changed color. "It was like looking at something that shouldn't exist," Wells recalled. "The blue was so intense it hurt to look at directly. I'd get this feeling like the ground was moving under my feet, even though I knew it wasn't." Maintenance worker Robert Chen noted that electronic equipment often malfunctioned during the color shifts. Radio communications became garbled, vehicle engines occasionally stalled, and digital cameras produced images with unusual color distortions that persisted for several minutes after the formations returned to normal. Visitors who witnessed the color shifts described the experience as profoundly unsettling. Dr. Helen Martinez, a chemistry professor from Portland State University, observed the phenomenon during a 1989 visit and attempted to document it with scientific instruments. "I brought spectrometers and pH testing equipment, thinking I could measure whatever was causing the color change," Martinez later wrote, "but the instruments gave inconsistent readings during the event. It was as if the normal rules of chemistry were temporarily suspended." Martinez's spectral analysis showed impossible readings that indicated the blue color absorbed light wavelengths that should have been reflected by the rock's mineral composition. The National Park Service initiated a comprehensive study of the color shifts in 1991, bringing together geologists, chemists, and atmospheric physicists from multiple universities. The research team installed permanent monitoring equipment including seismographs, magnetometers, and atmospheric sensors around the affected area. Dr. Richard Whitman, the project's lead scientist, coordinated observations during the 1991 color shift using sophisticated imaging equipment and real-time chemical analysis tools. The results were inconclusive. Seismic activity remained normal, magnetic fields showed no anomalies, and atmospheric conditions remained stable throughout the 11-minute color change. The research team's chemical analysis revealed the most puzzling aspect of the phenomenon. Spectroscopic examination during the color shift indicated that the rock surfaces were simultaneously reflecting both red wavelengths and blue wavelengths, a physical impossibility according to established principles of mineral optics. The rocks appeared to be two different colors at the same time, Whitman noted in his preliminary report. "Our instruments detected both the original iron oxide signature and an intense blue reflection that had no identifiable source. Attempts to explain the anomaly through atmospheric interference, optical illusions, or equipment malfunction failed to account for the consistent timing and duration of the phenomenon. The study was discontinued in 1993 when funding was redirected to conventional paleontological research. Whitman's final report was classified as preliminary findings, requiring additional verification before publication. The monitoring equipment was removed and reassigned to other geological research projects. Team members were encouraged to focus on traditional fossil studies rather than unexplained color phenomena. Whitman's requests to continue the research were denied, and his detailed measurements were archived in restricted Park Service files that became inaccessible to external researchers. Subsequent attempts to study the color shifts have encountered systematic obstacles. Research proposals are declined due to budget constraints or scientific review concerns. University departments discourage graduate students from investigating the phenomenon, suggesting that their time would be better spent on conventional geological studies. The Park Service maintains no official documentation of the color shifts and refers inquiries to standard geological information about mineral composition and formation processes. Visitor guides make no mention of the annual September 23rd event, though some rangers quietly acknowledge its occurrence when asked directly by observant visitors. The color shifts continue with mechanical precision, transforming the same formations at exactly 3:17 p.m. every September 23rd. Park maintenance schedules now include equipment checks before that date, anticipating the temporary malfunctions that accompany each occurrence. The Painted Hills keep their appointment with impossible blue, following a schedule that predates human observation and serves a purpose that nobody admits to understanding. The Earth remembers something that geology cannot explain, marking time with colors that should not exist in places where permanence was supposed to be the only constant. Some bodies of water refuse to hold still for measurement, as if depth itself has become negotiable. Wallowa Lake sits at the base of the Wallowa Mountains in northeastern Oregon, formed by glacial activity that carved a natural basin 4 miles long and 1 mile wide. The lake reaches its maximum depth near the southern end, where glacial scouring created a depression that geologists estimate formed approximately 15,000 years ago during the last ice age. The Wallowa River feeds the lake from the north, while the outflow drains toward the Grande Ronde River through a series of wetlands and smaller lakes. The surrounding peaks rise above 8,000 feet, creating a dramatic alpine setting that has drawn visitors since the area was first surveyed by government expeditions in the 1870s. The lake's clear, cold water supports populations of kokanee, salmon, rainbow trout, and lake trout, making it a popular destination for recreational fishing and scientific study of high-altitude aquatic ecosystems. The Oregon Fish and Wildlife Department began systematic depth mapping of Wallowa Lake in 1976 as part of a comprehensive fisheries management study. The initial survey, conducted by senior biologist Dr. James Patterson using standard echo-sounding equipment, measured a maximum depth of 283 feet at coordinates 45 degrees, 17 minutes, 42 seconds north latitude and 117 degrees, 12 minutes, 18 seconds west longitude. Patterson's measurements were taken from a stationary boat using a Lowrance depth finder calibrated according to manufacturer specifications and cross-checked with manual sounding line. The readings were consistent across multiple measurements taken over several hours, and Patterson recorded them as definitive baseline data for future fisheries research and lake management planning. 3 years later, the United States Geological Survey conducted its own bathymetric survey of Wallowa Lake using more sophisticated sonar equipment mounted on a GPS-guided research vessel. Dr. Margaret Foster, a hydrologist specializing in alpine lake systems, supervised the 1979 survey that employed side-scan sonar and precision depth sounding technology recently developed for marine research applications. Foster's team measured the same coordinates that Patterson had surveyed and recorded a maximum depth of 311 feet, 28 feet deeper than the previous measurement. Foster initially suspected that Patterson's equipment had been incorrectly calibrated, but review of his documentation showed proper procedures and equipment maintenance throughout the original survey. The discrepancy prompted Foster to conduct additional measurements using different sonar frequencies and multiple positioning systems to verify the depth readings. Her team took measurements from various approaches to the deepest point, using both stationary readings and continuous profiling while crossing the area at different angles. All measurements consistently indicated a maximum depth of 311 feet. Foster's equipment logs showed normal operation of all instruments, with regular calibration checks confirming accuracy within manufacturer specifications. Water temperature and conductivity readings remained stable throughout the survey, indicating no unusual conditions that might affect sonar propagation or measurement accuracy. Local fishing guides reported conflicting experiences regarding the lake's depth characteristics. Captain Robert Morrison, who had operated guided fishing trips on Wallowa Lake since 1968, described encounters with the deepest area that didn't match either scientific survey. "I've been fishing that hole for over 40 years," Morrison explained during a 1981 interview. "Sometimes my fish finder shows bottom at 260 feet. Sometimes it shows 320 feet. Sometimes it doesn't show bottom at all." Morrison's logbooks documented numerous instances where depth sounders produced inconsistent readings from the same fishing locations, with variations that exceeded the range of typical equipment error or seasonal water level changes. Other lake users described similar anomalies. Scuba diving instructor Patricia Wells, who conducted training dives in Wallowa Lake during the 1970s and 80s, reported depth gauge discrepancies that troubled her safety protocols. "We'd plan a dive to 120 feet based on our depth sounders, but my students' gauges would show different readings," Wells recalled. One diver would read 115 feet, while another showed 130 feet at the same time and location. It made dive planning nearly impossible because we couldn't establish reliable depth references. Wells eventually prohibited advanced training dives in the deepest areas of the lake due to the measurement inconsistencies. The Oregon State University Limnology Department initiated a comprehensive study of Wallowa Lake in 1983, bringing together experts in hydrology, geology, and underwater surveying to resolve the depth discrepancies. Dr. Richard Chen led the research team, which employed multiple measurement techniques, including precision sonar, underwater photography, and core sampling, to understand the lake's bathymetry and sediment characteristics. The team's initial measurements, taken with university-owned equipment that had been recently calibrated, produced yet another maximum depth reading, 297 feet at the same coordinates, where previous surveys had recorded different values. Chen's team expanded the study to include measurements taken simultaneously from multiple boats positioned around the deepest area. The results were unprecedented in limnological research. 3 boats measuring the same underwater point recorded 3 different depths: 289 feet, 304 feet, and 316 feet. The variations occurred despite identical equipment, synchronized timing, and careful positioning using GPS coordinates. Chen repeated the multiple boat measurements 6 times over 3 days, consistently obtaining different depth readings from each vessel, even when they were positioned within 50 feet of each other above the supposed deepest point. Underwater core sampling revealed sediment layers consistent with normal glacial lake formation, with no evidence of unusual geological features that might create measurement errors. The sediment showed gradual accumulation over thousands of years, with no significant changes in deposition rates that could account for rapid depth variations. Water clarity and temperature profiles indicated normal stratification patterns for an alpine lake. Chemical analysis revealed no unusual mineral content or dissolved gases that might affect sonar propagation. The lake's physical characteristics appeared entirely typical, except for the impossible variations in depth measurements. The university's study was quietly terminated in 1985 when federal funding was redirected to conventional lake ecology research. Chen's preliminary findings were classified as inconclusive and filed in university archives with restricted access. Team members were reassigned to other projects, and graduate students working on Wallowa Lake research were encouraged to focus on fisheries biology rather than bathymetric anomalies. Chen's requests to publish the depth measurement discrepancies were denied by university administration, citing concerns about scientific credibility and potential negative impact on Oregon's tourism industry. Subsequent depth surveys of Wallowa Lake have been conducted by private consulting firms contracted for routine environmental monitoring, but these reports are not made available to the public. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife continues to list the lake's maximum depth as 283 feet, based on Patterson's original 1976 survey, despite the subsequent measurements that contradicted this figure. Modern GPS-equipped fish finders used by recreational anglers continue to produce inconsistent depth readings in the deepest areas, but these discrepancies are generally attributed to equipment limitations or user error. The lake maintains its secrets beneath the surface, where measurement becomes impossible and consistency dissolves into uncertainty. Anglers still fish the deepest holes without knowing how deep they actually are. Divers plan their descents based on depth readings that might change during the dive itself. The water looks the same from above, regardless of what lies beneath, and the numbers on the instruments tell different stories depending on who is asking the questions. Wallowa Lake keeps its own counsel about the space it occupies, existing in dimensions that refuse to be quantified by the tools designed to measure such things. Atmospheric pressure is supposed to change with the weather, but some instruments record the same reading regardless of what the sky is doing. McMinnville sits in the heart of Oregon's Willamette Valley, 38 miles southwest of Portland, among rolling hills covered with vineyards and agricultural fields. The city was founded in 1856 by William Newby, who platted the town site along the Yamhill River, where the fertile valley floor meets the foothills of the Coast Range. The area's Mediterranean climate and well-drained soil created ideal conditions for farming, and McMinnville became the commercial center for surrounding agricultural communities. The National Weather Service established a monitoring station 3 miles west of town in 1979, positioned on a gentle rise that provided clear exposure to prevailing weather patterns from the Pacific Ocean. The station formed part of a regional network designed to track atmospheric conditions across the Willamette Valley for agricultural forecasting and flood prediction along the river systems that drain the western Oregon mountains. The weather station operated with standard automated equipment, including temperature sensors, humidity monitors, wind speed and direction indicators, and a precision barometric pressure gauge manufactured by Belfort Instrument Company. The barometric pressure instrument measured atmospheric pressure in inches of mercury, transmitting readings every hour to the National Weather Service Regional Office in Portland. Normal atmospheric pressure at McMinnville's elevation of 160 feet above sea level ranged from 28.8 inches during strong low-pressure systems to 30.4 inches during stable, high-pressure conditions. Seasonal variations typically produced pressure swings of 1 to 2 inches as weather systems moved across the Pacific Northwest, with daily fluctuations of several tenths of an inch being common as atmospheric conditions changed. The anomaly began on March 18, 1988, when meteorologist Dr. Susan Chen noticed that the McMinnville station had reported identical barometric pressure readings for 3 consecutive days. The pressure gauge showed 29.92 inches of mercury at every hourly transmission, a reading that represented normal atmospheric pressure but should have varied as weather systems passed through the area. Chen initially suspected equipment malfunction and dispatched a maintenance technician to inspect the station. Technician Robert Patterson found all equipment functioning normally, with the barometric sensor showing proper calibration and no signs of mechanical failure. Patterson replaced the pressure gauge with a new unit, but the replacement instrument continued to transmit the same 29.92 reading hour after hour. The consistent pressure readings continued for weeks, while weather conditions across the Willamette Valley showed normal variations. Stations in Salem, Corvallis, and Portland recorded pressure changes that corresponded to passing storm systems, temperature fluctuations, and seasonal atmospheric patterns. The McMinnville station registered identical readings, regardless of whether skies were clear, overcast, or experiencing active precipitation. During a significant storm system in April of 1988, Portland recorded a pressure drop to 28.4 inches, while McMinnville continued to transmit 29.92. The pressure differential between stations only 3 miles apart exceeded any known atmospheric gradient possible under normal meteorological conditions. Local farmers and pilots began reporting their own observations of unusual atmospheric conditions in the McMinnville area. Agricultural Extension Agent Margaret Foster documented crop growth patterns that didn't match normal responses to barometric pressure changes. Plants respond to pressure variations in predictable ways, Foster explained during a 1989 interview. But crops near the weather station were growing as if pressure remained constant, even during major storm systems that should have affected plant metabolism. Pilots flying into McMinnville Municipal Airport reported altimeter readings that required unusual corrections when approaching from certain directions, suggesting localized pressure anomalies that affected aircraft instruments. Dr. Eleanor Martinez, an atmospheric physicist from Oregon State University, investigated the pressure anomaly during 1989 using portable monitoring equipment positioned around the McMinnville weather station. Martinez's measurements revealed a circular area approximately 2 miles in diameter, where atmospheric pressure remained stable at 29.92 inches, regardless of surrounding weather conditions. It was like discovering a bubble of unchanging atmospheric conditions in the middle of a dynamic weather system. Martinez noted in her research log, pressure readings changed normally outside this area, but within the circle, measurements remained absolutely constant. Martinez's equipment detected no underground geological features, electromagnetic anomalies, or artificial sources that could create such atmospheric stability. The National Weather Service conducted its own investigation in 1990, bringing specialized equipment to verify the McMinnville station's readings and understand the pressure anomaly. Dr. James Morrison led the investigation team, which included atmospheric scientists and instrument specialists from the regional office. Morrison's team installed multiple barometric sensors throughout the area and conducted synchronized measurements to map the extent of the pressure stability. The investigation confirmed Martinez's findings. Atmospheric pressure within a defined circular area remained constant, while normal pressure variations occurred outside the boundaries. The phenomenon affected all types of barometric instruments, regardless of manufacturer or measurement technology. Weather Service investigators attempted to correlate the pressure anomaly with various environmental factors, including underground geology, topography, and human activities. Geological surveys revealed no unusual subsurface features, such as caves, mineral deposits, or underground water systems that might influence atmospheric conditions. The terrain showed gentle rolling hills, typical of the Willamette Valley, with no unusual elevation changes or geographic features. Industrial facilities in the area consisted of agricultural processing plants and light manufacturing that produced no known atmospheric effects. The investigation team concluded that no conventional explanation could account for the localized pressure stability. The pressure readings abruptly returned to normal variation on February 7, 1991, after 847 consecutive days of identical measurements. The change occurred without warning or apparent cause, with the McMinnville station beginning to record normal atmospheric pressure fluctuations that matched readings from surrounding weather stations. Dr. Morrison conducted follow-up measurements to determine whether the pressure anomaly had moved to a different location, but found no evidence of unusual atmospheric conditions anywhere in the Willamette Valley. The localized pressure stability had simply ceased to exist. The National Weather Service quietly relocated the McMinnville Weather Station in 1991, moving it to a site 12 miles southeast of the original location without public announcement. Official records listed the relocation as routine facility modernization, with no mention of the pressure anomaly that had affected the original site. Morrison's investigation report was classified as preliminary findings, requiring additional verification before publication. Attempts by university researchers to access the data were declined due to quality control concerns and potential impacts on agricultural forecasting accuracy. Dr. Martinez's atmospheric research was similarly restricted when her university funding was redirected to conventional meteorological studies. Her equipment was reassigned to standard weather monitoring projects, and her graduate students were encouraged to focus on traditional atmospheric physics rather than unexplained pressure phenomena. Martinez's requests to publish her findings about the McMinnville pressure anomaly were denied by university administration, citing scientific credibility concerns and the need for peer review validation that never materialized. The original weather station site remains an empty field west of McMinnville, marked only by concrete foundations where monitoring equipment once stood. Local farmers continue to work the surrounding land, which now shows normal responses to atmospheric pressure changes. The circle of impossible stability has dissolved into ordinary air that rises and falls with the passage of weather systems. Yet, questions linger in the atmosphere, where instruments once recorded the same measurement while the world changed around them, as if that small piece of sky had forgotten how to respond to the forces that govern everything else above the earth. The earth beneath volcanoes should move according to the laws of geology, not the precision of clockwork. The Three Sisters Volcanic Complex rises from the Central Oregon Cascades 60 miles east of Eugene, consisting of 3 distinct stratovolcanoes that reach elevations above 10,000 feet. North Sister, Middle Sister, and South Sister formed through successive periods of volcanic activity spanning the last 50,000 years, with South Sister showing the most recent eruptions approximately 2,000 years ago. The volcanic field encompasses nearly 300 square miles of wilderness, including numerous cinder cones, lava flows, and alpine lakes formed by glacial activity and volcanic processes. The area was designated as the Three Sisters Wilderness in 1964, protecting the pristine alpine environment while allowing scientific study of active volcanic systems. The United States Geological Survey established permanent seismic monitoring stations around the complex in 1975 to track potential volcanic activity and provide early warning of eruptions that could threaten populated areas in the Willamette Valley. Seismic monitoring of the Three Sisters complex initially focused on detecting precursors to volcanic eruptions, including the swarms of small earthquakes that typically accompany magma movement beneath active volcanoes. Dr. Robert Patterson, a volcanologist with the USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory, designed the monitoring network to include 8 seismograph stations positioned around the volcanic complex at distances ranging from 5 to 15 miles from the peaks. The stations employed sensitive instruments capable of detecting micro-earthquakes with magnitudes below 1.0, tremors too small to be felt by humans, but significant enough to indicate subsurface geological activity. The monitoring system transmitted data continuously to the observatory in Vancouver, Washington, where computers analyzed earthquake patterns for signs of increased volcanic activity or magma intrusion. The first anomalous seismic pattern appeared on November 12, 1975, when Patterson's monitoring system detected a sequence of 3 small earthquakes occurring at precise intervals beneath the South Sister volcano. The earthquakes measured magnitudes of 0.8, 0.7, and 0.9 respectively, with each tremor separated by exactly 17 hours and 30 minutes. Patterson initially dismissed the timing as coincidence, But subsequent analysis revealed that similar three earthquake sequences had been occurring since monitoring began, with each group of tremors following the same precise schedule. The pattern defied conventional understanding of volcanic seismicity, which typically shows irregular clustering during periods of increased magma movement or structural stress changes. Patterson expanded the monitoring program to include additional seismographs and more sophisticated timing equipment to verify the earthquake patterns. The enhanced monitoring confirmed that micro-earthquake sequences occurred in groups of three at 17.5-hour intervals, with timing precision that exceeded the accuracy of natural geological processes. Each earthquake in a sequence originated from slightly different depths and locations beneath the volcanic complex, but all remained within a 5-mile radius of South Sisters summit. The earthquake magnitudes varied between 0.6 and 1.2, too small to cause surface damage, but large enough to indicate significant subsurface energy release. Local residents and wilderness users reported subtle phenomena that coincided with the seismic patterns. Forest Service Ranger Margaret Foster noted that wildlife behavior in the Three Sisters Wilderness showed unusual rhythmic changes that seemed to correspond with earthquake timing. Every day and a half, around the same times, the forest would go completely quiet for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, Foster recalled during a 1978 interview. No bird sounds, no insect noise, nothing. Then gradually the normal forest sounds would return. Foster began keeping detailed logs of these quiet periods and found they occurred within 1 hour of each three earthquake sequence, detected by the monitoring end stations. Hiking guide James Morrison, who led backcountry trips in the Three Sisters area for 12 years, observed that his compass readings became unreliable at specific times during wilderness expeditions. About every day and a half, our compasses would start spinning or pointing in obviously wrong directions, Morrison explained. It would last for maybe half an hour. Then everything would return to normal. Morrison's trip logs documented 37 instances of compass anomalies between 1976 and 1979, each occurring within 2 hours of detected earthquake sequences. The timing correlation troubled Morrison, who relied on accurate navigation for group safety in the roadless wilderness areas. Dr. Elena Martinez, a seismologist from the University of Oregon, joined Patterson's research team in 1977 to investigate the earthquake timing patterns using advanced computer analysis and statistical modeling. Martinez's calculations revealed that the probability of natural earthquakes occurring in such precise time intervals was effectively zero, requiring explanation through either unknown geological processes or artificial seismic sources. Natural earthquake sequences show statistical clustering, but never mechanical precision, Martinez noted in her research reports. The Three Sisters pattern suggested either a completely new type of volcanic process or seismic activity controlled by non-geological factors. The research team attempted to correlate the earthquake patterns with various environmental factors, including tidal forces, atmospheric pressure changes, and solar activity cycles. None of these natural phenomena matched the 17.5-hour periodicity of the seismic sequences. Tidal analysis revealed no gravitational patterns that could trigger earthquakes at such precise intervals. Atmospheric pressure data showed no correlation with earthquake timing. Solar radiation and magnetic field measurements indicated no unusual space weather activity during periods of seismic activity. The earthquake patterns appeared to operate independently of all known natural forces that influence tectonic processes. Ground-penetrating radar surveys and magnetic field mapping of the Three Sisters area revealed no underground structures or geological features that could generate artificial seismic signals. The volcanic complex showed typical magma chamber characteristics and structural geology consistent with other Cascade Range volcanoes. No evidence existed of underground machinery, mining operations, or other human activities that might produce regular seismic signatures. The earthquakes originated from natural fault systems and magma conduits beneath the volcanoes. but their timing suggested external control mechanisms that geological science could not identify. The USGS classified Patterson's seismic timing research in 1979, transferring his data to restricted archives and reassigning him to conventional volcanic monitoring duties at Mount St. Helens. Official explanations cited the need to focus resources on volcanoes with higher eruption probabilities and greater threats to populated areas. Patterson's attempts to publish his findings about the Three Sisters earthquake patterns were blocked by agency review processes that determined the data required additional verification before scientific release. The timing precision measurements were removed from public earthquake databases and replaced with standard seismic reports that omitted references to regular periodicity. Dr. Martinez's university research was similarly restricted when federal funding for her statistical analysis was terminated without explanation. Her computer models and timing calculations were classified as preliminary findings, requiring peer review validation that was never scheduled. Martinez found her access to USGS seismic data limited to conventional earthquake information, with precise timing details removed from the datasets. Her graduate students were encouraged to focus on traditional seismology research rather than unexplained earthquake patterns that might damage their academic careers. Contemporary seismic monitoring of the Three Sisters complex continues through automated systems that record earthquake activity for volcanic hazard assessment. Public earthquake reports list microseismic events in the area as normal background activity associated with cooling magma chambers and regional tectonic stress. The precise timing patterns are no longer mentioned in scientific literature or hazard assessments. Hikers and climbers in the Three Sisters Wilderness occasionally report the periodic forest silences and compass anomalies that coincide with unacknowledged earthquake sequences, but these observations are attributed to natural phenomena and altitude effects on sensitive equipment. The earth beneath the Three Sisters keeps its mechanical rhythm, marking time with tremors that follow schedules carved in stone by forces that geology textbooks do not describe. The volcanoes stand silent above the clockwork seismicity, their peaks catching morning light, while the ground below counts the hours in patterns too precise to be natural and too regular to be ignored. The mountains know what they are measuring, but the instruments that detect their precision are no longer allowed to remember the mathematics of their movement. Sound travels at known speeds through predictable distances, except in places where the rules of physics seem to have been quietly rewritten. Steens Mountain rises from the high desert of southeastern Oregon like a massive fault block tilted toward the sky, its western face climbing 9,500 feet above the Alvord Desert in a near-vertical escarpment that stretches for 30 miles. The mountain formed through basin and range geology, where tectonic forces lifted and tilted enormous blocks of ancient basalt and sedimentary rock over millions of years. The eastern slope descends gradually through sagebrush and juniper country toward the Blitzen River Valley, while the western face drops precipitously into one of the most isolated desert basins in North America. The area remained largely unexplored until government survey teams mapped the region in the 1870s, documenting a landscape so remote and harsh that few settlers attempted permanent habitation. The Bureau of Land Management designated much of the area as wilderness in 1988, protecting its geological features and fragile desert ecosystems from development. The ecophenomenon was first documented in August of 1982 by geology graduate student David Chen, who was conducting field research on fault scarps along the western face of Steens Mountain. Chen discovered a natural amphitheater formed by intersecting basalt cliffs, approximately 2 miles south of the mountain's highest point, where geological processes had carved a semicircular depression with near-perfect acoustic properties. The formation consisted of layered basalt walls, rising 300 feet above a flat floor, covered with loose talus and scattered boulders. Chen noticed the unusual acoustics when he called out to his research partner, and heard his voice return with extraordinary clarity after an impossibly long delay. Chen timed the echo using his digital chronometer and consistently measured a 27-second delay between his original call and the returning sound. The timing puzzled him because basic acoustic calculations indicated that sound traveling at the standard speed of 1100 feet per second should have returned within 8 to 10 seconds, given the apparent dimensions of the rock formation. Chen repeated the experiment multiple times, using different vocalizations, and consistently recorded the same 27-second delay. He explored the amphitheater to determine whether hidden geological features might account for the extended echo time, but found no caverns, overhangs, or complex surface geometries that could create such acoustic effects. The anomaly deepened when Chen noticed that some returning echoes contained sounds he had not made. During one experiment, he called out a simple hello and heard the echo return with additional syllables that formed no recognizable words. During another test, his echo seemed to include faint voices speaking in conversational tones, though he was alone in the amphitheater and no other people were visible for miles across the desert landscape. Chen recorded several echo sessions using a portable tape recorder, documenting both the precise timing and the occasional presence of unidentifiable sounds mixed with his own voice returning from the basalt walls. Local ranchers and hunters who worked in the Steens Mountain area provided conflicting accounts of the amphitheater's acoustic properties. Bill Morrison, whose family had run cattle in the region since 1947, described encountering the formation during hunting trips and being disturbed by its echo characteristics. "You'd call to your hunting partner and hear your voice come back wrong," Morrison recalled during a 1985 interview. "Sometimes it sounded like other people answering you, sometimes like your own voice, but saying different words." Morrison began avoiding the area after several experiences where echoes seemed to include voices of people who were not present. Dr. Sarah Kim, an acoustic engineer from Oregon State University, investigated the phenomenon in 1984 using professional sound recording equipment and acoustic analysis instruments. Kim's measurements confirmed the 27-second echo delay and documented additional anomalies, including frequency shifts that indicated sound waves were somehow being modified during their reflection from the basalt surfaces. The returning echo showed acoustic properties that violated basic principles of sound reflection, Kim noted in her research logs. Frequencies were appearing in the echo that had not been present in the original sound, and some frequencies from the original call were completely absent from the return. Kim expanded her study to include multiple microphones positioned throughout the amphitheater to track sound wave propagation and identify the source of the extended echo timing. Her equipment detected sound waves that appeared to travel in circular patterns around the formation, as if being repeatedly reflected between surfaces before finally returning to the source. More disturbing were recordings that showed sound waves continuing to bounce within the formation for several minutes after the original call, creating a faint acoustic activity that persisted long after the primary echo had returned. Kim's spectrographic analysis revealed that these extended reverberations contained structured patterns resembling speech or music, though no clear words or melodies could be identified. The acoustic properties of the formation seemed to vary with atmospheric conditions and time of day. Robert Patterson, a physics professor who joined Kim's research team, documented that echo characteristics changed significantly between morning and afternoon measurements. During morning hours, echoes returned more quickly and contained fewer anomalous sounds. Afternoon experiments consistently produced the 27-second delay and frequently included unidentifiable vocal elements. Patterson's atmospheric measurements showed no correlation between air temperature, humidity, or barometric pressure and the acoustic variations, suggesting that the changes resulted from factors other than standard atmospheric effects on sound propagation. Wildlife in the area exhibited unusual behavioral patterns that seemed related to the acoustic anomaly. Desert bighorn sheep, which typically used the amphitheater area for shelter, consistently avoided the formation during certain times of day, Bird species that normally nested in cliff faces showed no activity within the acoustic formation, while similar geological features nearby supported typical wildlife populations. Dr. Elena Martinez, a wildlife biologist studying desert ecosystems, noted that animals appeared to respond to sounds humans could not detect. The wildlife behavior suggested that acoustic activity continued in frequency ranges beyond human hearing. Martinez observed, animals were clearly detecting and avoiding something that our equipment wasn't measuring. The research team's work was interrupted in 1985 when federal land management officials restricted access to the amphitheater, citing concerns about visitor safety and environmental protection. The restriction was imposed without prior notice or public comment, effectively ending academic study of the acoustic phenomenon. Kim's research equipment was removed from the site, and her data was classified as preliminary findings requiring additional verification. The acoustic analysis that had documented impossible echo characteristics disappeared from university files during a routine data management review. Patterson's physics measurements were similarly restricted when his university funding was redirected to conventional acoustic research projects. His spectrographic evidence of frequency anomalies was designated as requiring peer review validation that was never scheduled. Graduate students working on the project were encouraged to focus on traditional acoustic engineering rather than unexplained phenomena that might damage their academic prospects. The team's attempts to publish their findings were blocked by review processes that cited methodological concerns and the need for reproducible results under controlled conditions. Contemporary topographic maps of Steens Mountain show the amphitheater formation as unnamed terrain, with no special designations or tourist information. Hiking guides for the area make no mention of unusual acoustic properties, and recreational climbing routes avoid the formation despite its accessibility and dramatic geological features. Bureau of Land Management rangers discourage public access to the area, citing unstable rock conditions and the remoteness that makes emergency rescue difficult. The official position maintains that no unusual acoustic phenomena have been documented in scientific literature. The amphitheater waits in the high desert silence, its basalt walls holding conversations with the wind and returning sounds that carry more than physics allows. The 27-second stretch between call and response, like a gap in time, where echoes learn new words and practice voices that have no source. The formation keeps its acoustic secrets, while the desert around it follows the normal rules of sound and distance, leaving only questions carved in stone that refuses to explain why it remembers voices that were never spoken within its ancient walls. Some signals from the water below are meant for observers who understand mathematics better than mariners. The Columbia River Gorge cuts through the Cascade Range for 80 miles between Oregon and Washington, where the river carved a channel through volcanic basalt layers over millions of years of geological time. The gorge reaches depths of 4,000 feet below the surrounding plateau, creating dramatic cliffs and waterfalls that frame the river's path to the Pacific Ocean. Wind patterns funneled through the gorge create some of the most consistent sailing conditions in North America, while the river itself carries more cargo traffic than any other waterway on the West Coast. Commercial aviation routes cross the gorge at various altitudes, providing pilots with clear views of the water surface and surrounding terrain. The Federal Aviation Administration established specific flight corridors through the area in the 1960s to manage increasing air traffic while maintaining separation from the mountainous terrain that rises abruptly on both sides of the river. The first documented light pattern observation occurred on September 14, 1983, when Captain Robert Chen, flying a cargo route from Seattle to San Francisco, reported unusual flashing lights on the Columbia River surface near Cascade Locks. Chen observed a series of bright white flashes that appeared to originate from the water itself rather than from any visible vessel or structure. The flashes occurred in groups of irregular timing that caught Chen's attention during his routine flight at cruising altitude. Chen recorded the observation in his pilot logbook and filed a standard report with air traffic control, noting the approximate location and time of the light activity. The report was forwarded to Coast Guard stations in the area for investigation of possible vessel distress signals or navigation hazards. Coast Guard investigation of Chen's report found no vessels in distress and no equipment that could have produced the light flashes he described. Marine traffic in the area during the time of observation consisted of routine cargo barges and recreational boats, none of which carried high-intensity lighting systems or reported any emergency situations. The Coast Guard concluded that Chen had likely observed reflected sunlight from wave surfaces or possibly flares from industrial facilities along the river. However, Chen's description of the light patterns suggested organized sequences rather than random reflections or industrial activity. His logbook entry noted that the flashes appeared to follow a mathematical progression, with timing intervals that decreased according to what appeared to be a predictable pattern. Additional pilot reports began accumulating over the following months, each describing similar light phenomena in the Columbia River Gorge area. Captain Sarah Kim, flying passenger service between Portland and Denver, observed synchronized light flashes that formed recognizable number sequences when plotted on paper. The lights would flash once, then twice, then 3 times, then 5 times, then 8 times. Kim explained during a 1984 interview with Federal Aviation Administration investigators, "I recognized it as the Fibonacci sequence from college mathematics. The pattern repeated 3 times before stopping completely." Kim's observation was corroborated by her co-pilot and documented in the aircraft's flight log with precise timing and location coordinates. Dr. James Patterson, a mathematics professor at Portland State University, who frequently flew private aircraft through the gorge, observed light patterns that appeared to represent prime numbers in visual form. During a flight on March 21, 1985, Patterson counted light flashes that corresponded to the sequence 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, and 23 before the pattern ended. These weren't random flashes, Patterson noted in his research journal. Someone or something was communicating mathematical concepts using light signals from the river surface. Patterson began carrying video equipment during flights to document the phenomena, but his cameras consistently malfunctioned when pointed toward the areas where light patterns appeared. Other pilots reported light sequences that resembled binary code, with short and long flashes that could be interpreted as ones and zeros in computer programming. Captain Margaret Foster, who flew regular freight routes through the region, documented several instances where light patterns spelled out simple binary messages when transcribed according to standard computing conventions. One sequence translated to the ASCII code for the word sequence when you converted the light timing to binary digits, Foster recalled. That seemed like too much of a coincidence to ignore. Foster's attempts to respond to the light patterns using her aircraft's landing lights produced no apparent reaction from the source below. The Columbia River Gorge Commission, a bi-state agency responsible for managing the area's natural resources, conducted its own investigation of the light phenomena in 1986. Dr. Elena Martinez, the Commission's environmental scientist, coordinated with Marine Patrol units and aircraft observers to monitor the river surface during periods when light patterns had been reported. Martinez's team employed night vision equipment and underwater monitoring devices to detect possible sources of the illumination. The investigation revealed no underwater installations, submarine activities, or surface vessels that could account for the light displays. Water depth measurements and sonar surveys showed normal river bottom conditions, with no unusual structures or equipment present. The United States Geological Survey joined the investigation after pilots reported that light patterns appeared to correlate with seismic activity in the Cascade Range. Dr. Richard Whitman, a geologist specializing in volcanic monitoring, analyzed pilot reports alongside earthquake data and found that mathematical light sequences often occurred within 48 hours of minor seismic events in the region. There seemed to be a connection between underground geological activity and the surface light phenomena, Whitman noted in his preliminary report. But no known physical process could explain how seismic energy might produce organized light patterns on water surfaces. Whitman's theory suggested that piezoelectric effects in crystalline rock formations might generate electrical discharges that somehow manifested as surface illumination. But laboratory tests could not reproduce such effects under controlled conditions. Military aircraft flying training missions through the Columbia River Gorge provided additional documentation of the light patterns through classified observation reports. Air Force pilots conducting low-level navigation exercises reported light sequences that appeared to respond to aircraft approach patterns, with flashing intensifying when multiple aircraft flew through the area simultaneously. These reports were forwarded to the North American Aerospace Defense Command for analysis of possible foreign surveillance activities or electronic warfare testing. Military investigators found no evidence of hostile aircraft or submarine operations in the Columbia River system, but classified their findings as sensitive information requiring restricted distribution. The investigation was quietly terminated in 1987 when federal funding for unexplained phenomena research was eliminated from agency budgets. Pilot reports of mathematical light patterns were reclassified as atmospheric optical illusions or equipment reflections, requiring no further investigation. The Federal Aviation Administration issued guidance to pilots suggesting that unusual light observations should be attributed to industrial activities, vessel traffic, or natural phenomena unless clear safety hazards were present. Scientific data collected during the investigation was archived in restricted files that became inaccessible to civilian researchers. Dr. Martinez's environmental monitoring equipment was reassigned to conventional water quality studies, and her research team was disbanded without completing their analysis of the light phenomena. Patterson's mathematical documentation was dismissed as coincidental pattern recognition, and his requests to publish findings about the numerical sequences were denied by university administration. The Columbia River Gorge Commission removed references to unexplained light activity from its environmental reports and focused resources on traditional conservation and recreation management programs. Contemporary aviation charts for the Columbia River Gorge show no special notations regarding unusual light phenomena or restrictions on aircraft observation activities. Pilots flying through the area occasionally report seeing organized light patterns from the water surface, but these observations are recorded as routine weather or traffic incidents requiring no investigation. The river continues its flow toward the Pacific, carrying cargo and recreational traffic past the points where mathematical messages once flashed from depths that contained no visible source. The water keeps its calculations private while aircraft pass overhead, their crews no longer encouraged to document the sequences that spell out theorems in languages that navigation manuals do not teach. Some marks on the Earth are too precise to be natural and too permanent to be explained by the tools that should have made them. The Alvord Desert stretches across 12 miles of southeastern Oregon's high desert country, forming a flat playa enclosed by the Steens Mountain Escarpment to the west and the Pueblo Mountains to the south. This ancient lakebed sits at 4,100 feet elevation, where seasonal runoff creates a shallow lake that evaporates each summer, to leave behind a hard-packed surface of alkaline clay and mineral deposits. The desert formed over thousands of years as tectonic forces created a closed basin where water could enter but not escape, concentrating salts and sediments into the flattest natural surface in Oregon. Early settlers used the playa as a natural highway across the harsh terrain, and modern land speed record attempts take advantage of the perfectly level ground that extends for miles without significant obstacles. The Bureau of Land Management maintains minimal oversight of the area, which remains largely unchanged since government surveys first mapped the region in the 1880s. Satellite imagery analysis of the Alvord Desert began in 1979 as part of a geological survey program designed to map mineral resources and monitor environmental changes in Oregon's remote desert regions. Dr. Margaret Foster, a geologist with the United States Geological Survey, supervised the satellite photography project that employed high-resolution cameras aboard Landsat spacecraft to document surface features across the state's arid lands. Foster's initial analysis of the Alvord Desert images showed the expected features: seasonal water boundaries, mineral deposit patterns, and access roads created by ranching and recreational activities. However, detailed examination of photographs taken during different seasons revealed linear features that appeared too regular and precise to result from natural geological processes. The anomalous features consisted of 14 parallel lines running in perfect northeast to southwest orientation across the central portion of the desert floor. Each line measured exactly 1.2 miles in length and appeared as a subtle but distinct lighter coloration against the darker playa surface. The lines were spaced at irregular intervals ranging from 300 yards to over a mile apart, but each maintained identical orientation and length with mathematical precision. Foster initially suspected the lines represented vehicle tracks from military training exercises or surveying activities, but comparison with known access routes showed no correlation with documented human activities in the area. The lines appeared in satellite imagery dating back to the earliest Landsat missions in 1972, indicating they had existed for at least 7 years before their discovery. Ground reconnaissance of the Alvord Desert lines began in August of 1980 when Foster organized a field expedition to examine the features using traditional geological survey methods. The team included Dr. Robert Chen, a soil scientist from Oregon State University, and graduate student Patricia Wells, who specialized in desert geomorphology. The expedition established a base camp near the center of the line pattern and conducted systematic examination of multiple line segments using measuring equipment, soil sampling tools, and photographic documentation. The ground investigation revealed characteristics that defied conventional explanation for the line's formation and persistence. Close examination showed that the lines consisted of areas where the desert surface appeared to have been somehow compressed or altered to create a different reflective quality compared to the surrounding playa. However, no evidence existed of machinery, tools, or excavation work that could have created such precise alterations. The lines showed no tire tracks, footprints, or tool marks that would indicate human construction. Soil sampling revealed that the linear areas had identical mineral composition to the surrounding desert surface, ruling out explanations involving different materials or chemical treatments. Most puzzling was the line's apparent resistance to natural erosion processes that should have obscured any surface markings within months of their creation. Local ranchers and recreational users of the Alvord Desert provided conflicting accounts regarding the line's history and characteristics. Jim Morrison, whose family had run cattle in the area since 1943, claimed the lines had been visible for as long as he could remember, but insisted they changed position over time. Those lines weren't always in the same place. Morrison explained during a 1981 interview, "I'd see them one year, then come back the next season, and they'd be maybe a quarter mile different, but still the same length and direction." Morrison's recollections conflicted with satellite evidence showing the lines in consistent locations across multiple years, creating uncertainty about their stability and permanence. Dr. Sarah Kim, an atmospheric physicist who studied desert climate patterns, investigated whether wind erosion or seasonal weather changes could create the linear features through natural processes. Kim's analysis of wind patterns and precipitation data for the Alvord Desert showed that prevailing winds should have erased any surface markings within 1 to 3 years of their formation. The fact that satellite imagery showed consistent lines over nearly a decade indicated either continuous renewal of the features or resistance to erosion that exceeded normal expectations for playa surfaces. Kim's meteorological calculations could identify no natural mechanisms capable of creating such precise linear patterns or maintaining their definition against the constant action of wind and occasional flooding. The investigation expanded in 1982 when the Department of Defense expressed interest in the Alvord Desert lines as potential evidence of foreign surveillance or testing activities. Military intelligence analysts reviewed satellite imagery and conducted aerial reconnaissance flights to document the line's characteristics and search for associated infrastructure or personnel. The military investigation found no evidence of foreign activities, underground installations, or technological equipment that could explain the line's creation or maintenance. However, the Defense Department classified aspects of their findings and restricted civilian access to high-resolution satellite imagery of the area for national security reasons that were never clearly specified. Dr. Chen's soil analysis revealed microscopic characteristics that challenged conventional understanding of desert surface formation. The soil within the linear areas showed crystal structure variations that indicated exposure to intense pressure or temperature changes. Yet no corresponding changes appeared in the immediate surrounding areas. The soil samples looked like they had been subjected to some kind of industrial process, Chen noted in his research logs. But there was no evidence that any industrial equipment had ever been present in this remote location. Chemical analysis detected trace elements that were consistent with high-temperature mineral transformation, but the concentrations were too low and too localized to result from any known geological processes. The research project was terminated in 1983 when federal funding was redirected to conventional mineral resource surveys. Foster's satellite imagery analysis was classified as preliminary findings, requiring additional verification that was never authorized. The Defense Department maintained restricted access to updated satellite photography of the Alvord Desert, citing ongoing security assessments that prevented civilian research. Foster's attempts to publish her findings about the linear features were blocked by review processes that determined the data required validation through independent replication studies that were not funded. Contemporary satellite imagery of the Alvord Desert continues to show linear features in the same locations documented during the original survey, indicating that the lines persist despite decades of exposure to erosion and seasonal flooding. Modern GPS mapping confirms the precise northeast-southwest orientation and 1.2-mile length measurements recorded during the 1980s investigation. However, current Bureau of Land Management maps show no special designations or restrictions for the area containing the lines. Public access remains unrestricted, though few visitors travel to the remote location or are aware of the linear feature's existence. The lines continue their silent geometry across the desert floor, maintaining their impossible precision, while the explanation for their existence remains buried in classified files and discontinued research programs. The Alvord Desert keeps its secrets written in marks that refuse to fade, following orientations that point toward destinations no compass was designed to find. The Earth remembers something that left its signature in straight lines, too perfect for accident and too permanent for coincidence, marking distances measured in units that geology textbooks do not contain. Volcanic heat should follow the rules of geology and solar cycles, but some thermal patterns operate according to schedules that no textbook explains. Newberry National Volcanic Monument encompasses 54,000 acres of Central Oregon's high desert, centered on a massive shield volcano that rises 7,500 feet above sea level. The Newberry caldera formed through catastrophic eruptions that occurred 1,300 years ago, creating a 5-mile-wide depression containing 2 alpine lakes and numerous volcanic features, including obsidian flows, cinder cones, and hot springs. The monument was established in 1990 to protect the area's unique geological features and provide scientific access for volcanic research. The United States Geological Survey maintains permanent monitoring stations throughout the monument to track seismic activity, ground deformation, and thermal emissions that might indicate renewed volcanic activity. The volcano's location in the Cascade Range makes it a critical component of regional hazard assessment programs designed to protect populations in Bend, La Pine, and other Central Oregon communities. Thermal monitoring of the Newberry volcanic system began in 1981 when the USGS installed a network of temperature sensors designed to detect heat anomalies that might precede eruptions. Dr. James Patterson, a volcanologist specializing in thermal surveillance, supervised the installation of 12 monitoring stations positioned around the caldera rim and across the broader volcanic field. The sensors measured ground temperature, air temperature, and thermal radiation at 15-minute intervals, transmitting data to the Cascades Volcano Observatory via radio telemetry. Normal thermal patterns at Newberry showed predictable variations related to solar heating during daylight hours, seasonal temperature changes, and localized geothermal activity associated with hot springs and fumaroles near Paulina Lake and East Lake within the caldera. The first anomalous thermal readings appeared on October 7, 1983, when Patterson's monitoring system detected synchronized temperature spikes across multiple stations positioned around the monument's perimeter. The temperature increases occurred at exactly 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., showing perfect 12-hour periodicity that continued for several days before returning to normal pattern. Patterson initially suspected equipment malfunction, but diagnostic tests revealed all sensors functioning properly with normal calibration parameters. The temperature spikes measured between 8 and 15 degrees Fahrenheit, above baseline readings, occurring simultaneously across stations separated by distances of up to 12 miles. The geographic distribution of affected sensors formed a rough circle around the Newberry caldera, but the pattern didn't correspond to known geothermal features or underground heat sources. The thermal anomalies persisted intermittently over the following months, appearing for periods of 3 to 7 days before disappearing for weeks or months without apparent cause. During active periods, the 12-hour temperature cycle occurred with mechanical precision regardless of weather conditions, solar radiation levels, or volcanic activity within the caldera. Patterson documented that the thermal spikes showed no correlation with sunrise and sunset times, ruling out solar heating as the cause. Similarly, the patterns showed no relationship to tidal cycles, atmospheric pressure changes, or regional seismic activity that might trigger geothermal responses. The temperature increases appeared to originate from underground sources, but geological surveys revealed no unusual magma movement or hydrothermal circulation that could explain the regular timing and circular distribution. Local residents and monument visitors reported experiencing unusual sensations during periods when thermal monitoring detected the 12-hour temperature cycles. Forest Service Ranger Margaret Foster documented complaints from campers about feeling uncomfortably warm during early morning hours, when ambient temperatures should have been coolest. People would wake up around 6 a.m. feeling like they were sleeping too close to a campfire, Foster recalled during a 1985 interview. But there were no fires nearby, and the air temperature readings seemed normal. Foster began keeping logs of visitor complaints and found they clustered around the same 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. times when monitoring stations detected temperature anomalies. Dr. Sarah Kim, a geophysicist from Oregon State University, investigated the thermal patterns using portable monitoring equipment and ground-penetrating radar to search for underground heat sources. Kim's measurements confirmed the 12-hour temperature cycle and revealed that the thermal anomalies extended vertically through the soil column to depths of at least 50 feet below ground surface. The temperature increases weren't just surface phenomena, Kim noted in her research reports. The entire underground thermal profile was shifting in unison, as if some deep heat source was cycling on and off according to a preset schedule. Kim's attempts to correlate the thermal patterns with known geothermal processes found no matching mechanisms in volcanic literature or field studies from other monitoring sites. Wildlife biologists working in the Newberry area documented behavioral changes in local animal populations that coincided with the thermal anomalies. Dr. Robert Chen observed that deer and elk showed increased activity levels during the 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. temperature spikes, as if responding to environmental cues that human monitors could not detect. The animals seemed to know something was happening underground, Chen wrote in his field notes. They would become restless and move to different areas during the thermal events, then return to normal grazing patterns when temperatures dropped back to baseline. Bird populations also showed synchronized behavioral changes, with increased vocalizations and flight activity occurring precisely when temperature sensors detected thermal spikes. The investigation expanded in 1984 when the Department of Energy expressed interest in the Newberry thermal anomalies as potential indicators of geothermal energy resources or underground geological processes. Dr. Elena Martinez led a comprehensive study that included deep drilling, seismic profiling, and chemical analysis of groundwater and soil samples from areas affected by the temperature cycles. The investigation revealed normal volcanic geology with no unusual mineral deposits, underground cavities, or geothermal circulation patterns that could account for the regular thermal variations. Core samples from depths of up to 300 feet showed typical volcanic rock and sediment layers with no evidence of artificial heating elements or technological installations. Martinez's team attempted to map the exact boundaries of the thermal anomaly zone using dense networks of temporary monitoring stations. The results revealed a nearly perfect circle centered on the Newberry caldera, with a radius of approximately 6 miles, encompassing most of the national monument boundaries. The thermal effects showed sharp cutoff points at the circle's perimeter, with normal temperature patterns occurring just outside the affected area, while 12-hour cycles continued within the boundary. It was like discovering an invisible dome of thermal activity that didn't correspond to any visible geological features. Martinez noted in her final report, the boundary was too precise to result from natural underground processes. The research program was terminated in 1986, when federal funding was redirected to conventional geothermal energy development projects. Martinez's findings were classified as preliminary results, requiring additional verification that was never authorized. The Department of Energy removed its monitoring equipment from the Newberry area and reassigned personnel to commercially viable geothermal sites in other regions. Patterson's thermal monitoring data was archived in restricted files, and his requests to publish findings about the 12-hour temperature cycles were denied due to national security considerations involving geothermal resource assessment. Contemporary thermal monitoring at Newberry National Volcanic Monument continues through automated systems that record temperature data for volcanic hazard evaluation. The 12-hour thermal cycles are no longer reported in scientific literature or public safety assessments, though occasional temperature anomalies appear in monitoring records without explanation or investigation. Monument visitors sometimes report feeling unusual warmth during early morning and evening hours, but these experiences are attributed to microclimate effects and altitude variations. The USGS maintains that current thermal patterns at Newberry show normal volcanic background activity with no unusual characteristics requiring special study. The invisible circle of thermal variance continues its precise schedule beneath the high desert landscape, marking time in degrees that rise and fall according to mathematics that geothermal science cannot calculate. The ground keeps its appointments with heat that arrives on schedule twice each day, warming soil and stone according to patterns that predate the instruments designed to measure such things. Newberry Crater holds its thermal secrets, while the monitoring stations record temperatures that follow rules written in languages that volcanic textbooks have never learned to read. Radio waves travel in straight lines until they encounter something that shouldn't exist in empty air. Hell's Canyon cuts through the border between Oregon and Idaho as the deepest river gorge in North America, where the Snake River carved a channel 7,900 feet below the surrounding plateau over millions of years of geological erosion. The canyon stretches for over 100 miles through remote wilderness, its granite walls rising nearly vertically from the rushing water to windswept ridges that few humans have ever walked. The Nez Perce tribe inhabited these lands for thousands of years before white settlement, developing trade routes along narrow trails that followed natural ledges carved by ancient floods. The area became designated wilderness in 1975, protecting 650,000 acres of pristine mountain and canyon country from development. Emergency communication systems rely on radio repeaters positioned on high ridges to provide coverage for the scattered ranches, hunting camps, and wilderness areas where cellular service remains impossible, and traditional radio represents the only link to outside assistance. The first documented radio shadow phenomenon occurred on June 14, 1984, when search and rescue coordinator Robert Patterson attempted to establish radio contact with a helicopter crew conducting an emergency medical evacuation near Hat Point Overlook. Patterson was directing the rescue operation from the Wallowa County Sheriff's Dispatch Center when radio communication with the helicopter suddenly ceased at coordinates 45 degrees, 24 minutes, 18 seconds north latitude and 116 degrees, 51 minutes, 36 seconds west longitude. The helicopter crew later reported that their radio equipment had functioned normally until reaching a specific location within the canyon, where all communication channels went silent simultaneously. Upon moving approximately 500 feet in any direction from that point, radio contact resumed immediately with full signal strength. The incident prompted Patterson to conduct systematic radio tests using portable equipment positioned at various locations throughout Hell's Canyon during the following weeks. His tests revealed a circular area exactly 400 feet in diameter where radio signals failed to propagate normally, creating a dead zone that affected all frequencies, from emergency bands to commercial broadcasting. Equipment positioned within the circle could not receive signals from outside the area, nor could they transmit to receivers beyond the boundary. However, radio communication functioned normally between units positioned within the dead zone itself, suggesting that the phenomenon affected signal propagation rather than equipment operation. The circular boundary was so precise that Patterson could establish communication by moving just 10 feet outside the perimeter, while losing all signal by stepping 10 feet back inside. Professional communications engineer Dr. Sarah Kim investigated the radio shadow in 1985 using sophisticated signal analysis equipment borrowed from the Federal Communications Commission Regional Office. Kim's measurements confirmed the existence of a perfectly circular radio dead zone and revealed that electromagnetic signals appeared to bend around the area rather than being absorbed or blocked. It was like watching radio waves flow around an invisible obstacle, Kim noted in her technical report. The signals curved in ways that violated basic principles of electromagnetic propagation through open air. Kim's spectrum analysis detected no unusual electromagnetic fields, underground mineral deposits, or atmospheric conditions that could create such precise signal deflection effects. Local pilots and emergency personnel reported additional communications anomalies in the Hell's Canyon area that seemed related to the radio shadow phenomenon. Flight instructor Margaret Foster, who conducted training flights over the canyon, described GPS navigation failures that occurred at the same coordinates where radio communications ceased. The GPS would show normal satellite lock until we reached that specific spot, then suddenly indicate no satellite signals available, Foster explained during a 1986 interview. Move a few hundred feet away and full GPS function returned immediately. Foster's flight logs documented 12 instances of simultaneous radio and GPS failure at identical coordinates, suggesting that the phenomenon affected multiple types of electromagnetic signals. Dr. James Morrison, a geophysicist from the University of Idaho, attempted to correlate the radio shadow with underground geological features that might influence electromagnetic propagation. Morrison's ground-penetrating radar surveys and magnetic field measurements found no unusual subsurface structures, mineral deposits, or magnetic anomalies at the affected coordinates. The canyon geology showed typical granite and basalt formations consistent with regional patterns, with no caves, metallic ore bodies, or other features that could create electromagnetic interference. The radio dead zone existed in what appeared to be completely normal empty airspace. Morrison wrote in his research summary, "No physical explanation could account for the signal deflection effects we measured." The phenomenon attracted attention from federal communications authorities in 1986, when the Federal Aviation Administration reported that aircraft emergency locator beacons failed to function properly when activated. Within the Hells Canyon radio shadow, Dr. 144, Elena Martinez, a communications specialist with the FAA Technical Center, conducted extensive testing using various types of emergency radio equipment, including aviation transponders, marine distress beacons, and satellite communication devices. All equipment showed identical failure patterns when positioned within the circular dead zone, regardless of frequency, power output, or signal type. Martinez's investigation confirmed that the signal deflection affected electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum, from low-frequency radio waves to microwave satellite communications. Search and rescue operations began incorporating the radio shadow into emergency planning procedures after several incidents where rescue crews lost communication while attempting to reach accident sites within the affected area. Wallowa County Sheriff's Deputy Patricia Wells documented protocol changes that required rescue teams to maintain communication relays positioned outside the dead zone boundary. "We had to treat that circle like a communication black hole," Wells explained. Any rescue operation within the area required backup communication plans and relay stations to maintain contact with incident command. Wells' incident reports showed that the radio shadow had influenced emergency response procedures for over 30 rescue operations between 1986 and 1990. The United States Geological Survey launched a comprehensive study of the Hells Canyon radio phenomenon in 1987, bringing together experts in geology, atmospheric physics, and electromagnetic engineering. Dr. Richard Whitman led the multidisciplinary team that installed permanent monitoring equipment to track electromagnetic field variations, atmospheric conditions, and geological activity that might explain the signal deflection effects. The study employed sophisticated instruments including magnetometers, atmospheric ionization detectors, and broadband radio frequency analyzers to search for any physical mechanisms that could create the circular dead zone. The investigation revealed that radio signals approaching the affected area from any direction showed consistent deflection patterns that curved around the circular boundary with mathematical precision. The signal bending occurred gradually over distances of several hundred feet, creating smooth curvature that resembled optical refraction, but affected electromagnetic radiation in ways that atmospheric physics could not explain. Temperature measurements, humidity monitoring, and atmospheric pressure analysis showed no unusual conditions that could create electromagnetic refraction effects. The research team concluded that conventional atmospheric or geological mechanisms could not account for the observed signal deflection pattern. The study was classified in 1988 when the Defense Department determined that detailed electromagnetic propagation data might compromise national security communications systems. Whitman's technical reports were transferred to restricted archives, and the monitoring equipment was removed from Hells Canyon without public notification. Team members were reassigned to conventional geological surveys, and their research findings were classified as preliminary data requiring verification that was never authorized. Whitman's attempts to publish scientific papers about the radio shadow were blocked by security review processes that cited potential impacts on military communications security. Contemporary emergency services in the Hells Canyon region continue to incorporate the radio dead zone into operational planning, though official documentation refers to the area as a communication difficult zone, attributed to terrain interference effects. Modern GPS units and satellite communication devices still fail to function within the circular area, forcing emergency responders to maintain relay stations and alternative communication methods when operating in the affected location. The Federal Communications Commission maintains no official records of electromagnetic anomalies in Hell's Canyon, and engineering studies of the phenomenon remain classified or restricted from public access. The invisible circle persists in the canyon's depths, deflecting radio waves around empty air that behaves like solid matter to electromagnetic radiation. Emergency frequencies curve around the space where signals should travel straight, following paths that radio engineering textbooks insist are impossible. The canyon holds its electronic silence, while the world above fills with communications that bend around a place where the laws of physics have been quietly rewritten by forces that classification systems cannot name.